So for 2 years, I only jotted down ideas. I put down schemes, notes, pictures that I would like to use, and so on and so forth. Okay, then 2 years to write the actual text, and then another 1 year to revise. Also, thanks to the comments which I got from several colleagues to whom I sent the first version of the manuscript. Okay, and then probably it would be faster if there wouldn't be the pandemic in the middle. But I mean, everybody was, let's say, let's say, harmed by this. Okay, so the positioning of the book which I wrote is, let's say, a book which tried to provide a systematic knowledge for 3 types of users. Okay, students, policymakers, and academics. So students, they may be courses on regional policy, in degrees in geography, in planning, in political science, in economics, of course. Not first year undergraduate, in my opinion, because it's too complex to understand, but last year undergraduate and master student can take advantage from that. And also PhD students, because I mean, when you're a PhD student, you normally know a lot about your topic, but you probably need something which opens to related topics, so it's very helpful. Okay. The second target is the one of policymakers, because when I designed this, I was thinking about I had a specific type of policymaker in mind. Okay, and it's people who work at the European Commission. They work for a DG. Okay, and then they are suddenly moved to another DG. Okay, so they were doing, I don't know, competition policy, and then at a certain point they start doing regional policy because they move from one DG to the other. Okay, and so what to read, okay, when you change your work in this way. And my hope is that a book such as this can be helpful. Okay, so it's not everything you need to know, but it's, let's say, a good synthesis of many things that you may want to read when starting to work in this field. Okay. So, of course, more senior policymakers know a lot about this issue, so they probably need less such a book. Okay, but perhaps it's still interesting to see how different topics are treated. And then academics, maybe a reference book for academics. I was quite surprised that many colleagues told me, I'm reading your book, it's very interesting. So it's, let's say, advanced enough that even colleagues can read it. Okay, that's the idea. Okay, then second point on the positioning. I wanted to write a book just on regional policy, no regional economics, no economic geography. Okay, there are a lot of good texts on this. So the idea was to add on top of that. Okay, not doing the let's say the positive things, but only the normative things. Okay. Then I wanted to put a discussion of interaction between regional policy effects and their contexts. So it's one topic, but concerning other related topics, okay, it's not a textbook on evaluation. So evaluation it is inside, but only as a way to allow people who are users of evaluations, okay. So they work in public administrations, they get evaluation reports, they need to interpret these ones, okay, not to produce them directly. It's not also a book on urban economics or urban policy, because it's, I mean, it's very important, but there are good books on that, and it's related to be a book by itself. Okay, and I try to write a book which is not specific to a given place, so being conceptual and systemic so that things, let's say, are generally worth. So you start with the book, you have the title, you have the contract, but you end up with the first problem, which is to define the object of your book, okay? Because at the end, everybody knows what it is, regional policy, okay? But then I look for definitions, and actually I didn't find a lot of definitions, okay? So of course, this is my own definition. Other people may have a different definition, but this is the definition which I use in the book and which I developed, and which I discussed with the late Roberto Camagni, which you may know just passed out 1 year ago. So academics and policymakers always use the term regional policy in many things which are articulated. Okay, there are many things which are called regional policy and which are actually very different. Okay, but normally nobody says what regional policy is. Okay, so I found that two quite old definitions which are very interesting. One is by Stilwell in 72, who wrote a book on regional policy in 72. Is the establishment of the spatial framework for national development. So how to, let's say, distribute in space national development. Okay, nice. Okay, but I didn't. I wanted to go further again. And then there is also Vanova, who puts regional economic policy, a regional plan. It doesn't really distinguish, okay, and includes all forms of public intervention intended to ameliorate the geographic distribution of economic activities, okay? And ameliorate, of course, is open to any values from the community, okay? But both these definitions are more on purposes, not on what it is, okay? So the definition that I use wants to go beyond the objectives. And so I define the regional policy as any development policy which is intentionally spatially selective, okay, or intended to have differential spatial impacts. Okay, so the key is development, of course. Okay, so not just growth, but so not just economic one. So development is wider and growth. Okay, spatial. Okay, which means subnational. That then not giving a specific case on that. Okay, and then there is the focus on the intentionality of spatiality. Okay, so the idea is if you do it with the intention of having differential spatial effects, then it's regional policy. Okay, so if you have a policy which doesn't really have let's say a criteria for allocation, but it's done with that purpose, it's regional policy. So, of course, we combine two different types of policies. So one is one from the nation, when there is a policy by the nation or supranational entity, the EU, for instance, which intervene to change, let's say, the spatial distribution of the economy, but also policies by smaller entities such as regional governments or similar entities which want to improve their own level of development. Okay, but I don't want to make it a distinction like this to coincide with one between top down and bottom up. So it's more who does it, okay? And it's not even place-based and space-blind, because you can have policies by the nation which are place-based, okay? This is how, can you read it? It's okay, because it's quite small. How I classify regional policy within different types of policies. Okay, so the policy type, the main implementing body, if there is spatial selectivity, if there are spatial effects, okay, if these spatial effects are intentional or not, and then if this qualifies as regional policy or not. Okay, so the first case is easy because it is the policy by a single region. Okay, so the main implementing body is the region. Okay, the spatial selectivity is there by definition because a region which implements policies does it for its region. Okay, different spatial effects are there, of course, because you implement the policy in the region and not elsewhere. Okay, and these are intentional because if my region is Lombardy, okay, if the regional government of Lombardy implements some policies, okay, it intends to affect the economy of Lombardy, not of everywhere. Okay, so this is regional policy by definition. Okay, but then there are other policies which are, let's say, applied by the state. Okay, these are spatially selective. Okay, so there is a law which says that these policies are for some places and not others. Okay, and these spatial effects are there because policy is all implemented in some part of the country, and these are intentional. Okay, this is also regional policy in my opinion. Okay, so imagine policy for regions of a given country. Okay, or policies to reinforce the urban areas of a given country, or policies to reduce the concentration of economic activities within a country, with novel. Okay, for instance. Okay, these are by definition regional policies. Okay, then there is the third case, which is a bit trickier. Okay, there are policies which are applied by the state, okay, which have no formal criteria of selectivity, okay, but yet they intend to target some places and not other places, okay. In my opinion, since these special effects are intentional, this qualifies a regional policy, okay. So imagine that there are areas which are in crisis because of crisis in a given sector. You want to intervene on the sector, but because you want to target actually the areas which of specialization of this sector in crisis, okay? So you get to this type of policies, okay? So you help car manufacturing because you want to help the places in which car manufacturing is located, okay? So this is again regional policy with intentional effects, although no formal criteria, okay? Then there are case 4, which are policies by the state, okay, no formal spatial requirement, and which have unintentional differential effects in space. Okay, so imagine the state implements some policies, they are not spatially selective, but they end up having differential effects. Okay, and I believe that most macroeconomic policies are expected to fall here, just because there is some, let's say, specialization in different regions. Okay, so most of the policies which are applied by a country do not affect all the regions in the same way. Okay, but even policies which are for people may have a differential partial effects. So think about income tax. Okay, so you reduce income tax rates. Okay, and you get differential effects if the regions don't have exactly the same levels of personal income per capita. Okay, and finally there are okay, this is not regional policy in my opinion, okay, although very related because it has differential effects. Then finally there is the case of policies by the state with no formal spatial requirement and no differential effects in space. Okay, so these are by definition not regional policies. Okay, so imagine reducing personal income tax if the distribution of incomes is the same in all regions, so it has no differential effects. Okay, so just to see. Okay, so how I see regional policy. Okay, regional policy, in my opinion, is more like the art of medicine than are the sciences. Okay, then we may debate at the end if you want. Okay, but in the hard sciences, you have explicit laws and formulated in mathematical terms with many aspects. Okay, but regional policy is so complex. There are so many things. There are so many confounding factors that you normally never master everything at the same time in a deterministic way. Okay, of course you use models because the models are very helpful. They are helpful as a guide. Okay, but even the better model, the best models cannot capture all of the complexity. Okay, so they are very helpful. I work with model for the use of knowledge, but we should not confound the models with realities. Okay, so all models work based on assumptions and confidence intervals, so they are good as they are their assumption and confidence intervals. Okay, so models are very helpful because they provide predictions which are better informed than just guesses, of course. Okay, but regional policy remains very complex. Okay, so it's more like called the art of medicine. Okay, so it relies on a wide corpus of accumulated knowledge on how things work, which fixes work in the past. Okay, and like medicine, is expected to act when there are problems. Okay, so you normally don't go to the doctor when you feel good. And then the doctor produces a diagnosis, and the diagnosis in regional policy is done with the instrument, with surveys, with models, with statistics, and with qualitative information from the people. Okay, and then if you take a pill, not all patients react in the same way. And so is for regional policy, because any intervention may work differently in different regions. Okay, Then the reaction to occur depends on the conditions of a patient, and also the reaction to a policy intervention depends on the condition of the region, okay, on the regional situation and also on the external context. For instance, in periods of crisis, in periods of growth, and so on and so forth. Okay. Any cure can have side effects, and in regional policy we have trade-offs because we can go up in something and then pay in something else. Okay. And then there are conditioning effects, which make it more or less effective. Okay, and there are analysis for medicine, but there are also analysis on these conditioning effects for the, let's say, the science, the regional policy. Okay. Then another similitude, okay? Any medicine cure necessitates more than one kind of treatment. Normally, regional policy interventions need to use different components, different instruments at the same way. Okay, it's similar to a body because a regional system is made of many interrelated components. Then, when a doctor prescribes a cure, gives some timing for these cures, order and timing of everything, and this also applies to regional policy because you have to do the intervention in the right way, not just put everything together in a random order. Okay. Then a good doctor continues to monitor the patient, and regional policy interventions require evaluation and adaptability. Okay, even though not too much flexibility because most of regional policy intervention are structural, so they require time. They are more like antibiotics. Okay, you cannot stop in the middle. You need to finish the cure if you want to get better. Okay, so how much do you have?
10, 15 minutes.
Okay, so I skipped this. Okay, we can discuss it later on. Okay, perhaps just this slide. Okay, in terms of what role for the policy advisor, I think it's best to have. Okay, so you can describe regional policy as a function of many inputs and many outputs. Okay, so the inputs are the instruments that can be used, and the outputs are the objectives that you want to target. Okay, you normally don't have a perfect knowledge of this function, otherwise we get to perfect, let's say, perfectly deterministic policy. Okay, but a good expert can, let's say, act in these ways. Okay, one is to find the best combination of instruments to achieve a desired level of the policy objectives. Okay, so you go to an expert to ask, okay, I have this objective, which instrument should I apply? Okay. Another way to act is on the other side. Okay, you want to achieve the maximum level of a policy objective given the amount of available resources. Okay, so an expert should be able to tell this to the politicians. Okay. And the third aspect, which is less straightforward, the policy advisor should identify the space of trade-offs between objectives. Okay, so be able to present the alternatives. Okay, help the community choosing among alternatives and avoid choosing inefficient ones. Okay, because there may be situations in which you can go out of inefficient locations to get to a situation in which you get better on everything. Okay. And if once you are on the efficient frontier, then you have trade-offs, and then you need to navigate those trade-offs. Okay, so the actual contents of the book, I put it in 4 large parts. Okay, the first one with the definition, justifications, and names of regional policy. The second with the implementation of regional policy. The third one with the assessment, and the last one trying to put regional policy under different circumstances, okay, which is very important nowadays where we have that regional policy is very place-based. So I added a chapter which is chapter 0, okay, which is the introduction of the book, which, for instance, states these things which I told you before about the art of medicine, okay. But then the first chapter is the definition and overview. Okay, so I started from the very basics, so to define regions. because there are several definitions in the literature that may be helpful in a textbook. Then I define regional policy, which is what I showed you before. And then I try to put some things which are very, let's say, basic. So the different typologies of regional policies. So what you can classify regional policy on which dimensions. The hints on the relationship between regional policies and other policies, because many other policies have regional impacts, and vice versa, regional policy have impacts on other policies. The trade-offs, okay, some of them are treated in more detail afterwards, but here there is a generic description, okay? Then the basics, okay? So place-based versus space-blind is probably now a basic, okay? There is the old versus new approach to regional policy, okay? From that old OECD classification, and the role of the policy advisor, okay? Then let me go a bit faster, okay? Chapter 2 is about the rationale. So all the theories and explanation will tell you why there is the need of regional policy. So I start with the market failures. So the existence of local public goods and collective resources, the existence of externalities, the existence of collective action failures, okay? Then agglomeration economies, which may justify the presence of regional policy, but also congestion in these economies. Then there is the importance of cumulative development, because regional policy is also justified by this. The centripetal effects of integration and globalization. Okay. The fact that national adjustment mechanisms such as comparative advantage don't work for regions. The fact that you cannot address with macroeconomic policies issues which are very localized. Okay, things which depend on the efficiency. Okay, this should not be indent, but that's fine. Keeping inflation low, which is a traditional objective which we forgot for many years, and now it's again important. Environmental justifications, socio-political justifications, the justifications in recessions, and finally the cost of non-intervention. Okay, so from a theoretical point of view. Okay, then about the objectives, I'm going quite fast, but the idea is that I decided to reclassify all the possible regional policy objectives into 4 main dimensions. Okay, one is spatial equity and reducing disparities. Okay, so the traditional, most traditional one. The second one is efficiency, growth, and competitiveness. Okay, again, very traditional. And the third and fourth one are environmental protection and quality of life, which I mean, not necessarily us, but most people believe that they are new objectives. Okay, indeed, they are formulated differently from the past. Okay, but if you go to books of the 1970s, they are already there. Okay, so it's the way in which we address these issues, which is not their presence overall. Okay, so this comes from work from the OECD. Okay, a survey. I had to, let's say, ask permission to the publisher, not to you, because that's how it works. Okay, then the publisher gets the money, and those who worked on it, not they don't. Okay, but there are a lot of objectives. It was this nice survey on which objectives are important for OECD countries, and I reclassify them into those 4 main objectives. So the chapter has the treatment of these 4 objectives. So spatial equity, reducing disparities first, okay, regional disparities and territorial cohesion and identity. Then efficiency, growth, and competitiveness. Then a section on a trade-off between efficiency and equity. So when it is there, when it is not there. Environmental protection and sustainability, and improving quality of life. Okay, these are the 4 main objectives. Then there are other objectives which I consider functional to the achievement of those 4 objectives. So regional attractiveness, regional resilience, structural adjustment, enhancing territorial capital, increasing human capital and skills, avoiding decline, desertification, and middle income trap, limiting congestion in these economies, addressing social and demographic imbalances, growth, and then the growth and decoupling, because there is some debate. So I thought it was helpful to put something about that. Okay, all these are probably not objective in themselves, because their final objectives may be the reduction of disparities, maybe economic growth, maybe the quality of life of people, maybe saving the environment. Okay, so they are functional objectives. Okay, then the fourth chapter is about the process of regional policy and governance. So I start from the policy cycle, because you need to start from the basics. A discussion of which actors are involved in the process. So that's quite traditional. Then I thought it was important to have a section on behavioral aspects in regional policy, which are nowadays very important. So there is imperfect information, asymmetric information, and leadership issues. Okay. Then government and governance. So the various models, various governance models, and the importance of involving the civil society. Then a section on administrative capacity and why it is important, what policies are usually implemented to improve it, and policy transfer. And finally, a quite practical section on which issues are there when in strategy building. So, for instance, doing small or large projects, doing calls which are very open or very detailed, and so on and so forth. Okay. Then the instruments. Okay, so what kind of instruments you can apply? I try to start from let's say the most traditional to go to the more innovative. Okay, this is actually divided into because this, I took out innovation because it's deserves something like this. Okay, so in this case, I start from redistributed policies, which are not regional policy per se, but is what you can do if you want to rebalance the levels of income of people. Okay, so that's the easiest and basic things. Okay, but then there are first support as incentives, grow poles, attraction of FDI multinationals, special economic zones, then entrepreneurship, cluster policies, investment, capital, and finance. Okay, so everything related to how to enhance the investment rate in the region. Infrastructure. Okay, of course, it's very important, still very important. So not just transport, but also ICT and all other types of infrastructure. Then human capital, of course, has a very important role. So human capital is, let's say, a treatment which is larger than for other aspects. Okay, so not just universities, but also education, labor matching policies, brain drain, and also culture and creativity, which are very important for the attraction and retainment of human capital. A section of tourism, and finally, a section on the valorization of regional specificities and natural assets. Okay. Okay, I think there's no need to discuss why the instruments need to be used jointly in this room. Okay, and so I go to chapter 6. Okay, and the idea is the innovation is central to regional policy, because nowadays is considered to be the engine of long-run growth and has no decreasing returns. Okay, so but the concept of innovation is wide. And I think that evolutionary theories are very important to understand innovation. And innovation is a spatial phenomenon. Okay, so chapter 6 is just on innovation and regional policy. Okay, starting from the theory. Okay, so the relationship between innovation and growth, why evolutionary theories are helpful, why innovation policy is needed at the regional level, not just at the national one. Okay, and then I start with the actual instruments. Okay, so first the classification of innovation policy instruments. There are these, is Schott and Steinmüller, who had this very nice classification between the first, second, and third phase of innovation policies, where the first phase is solving, sorry, just in the word, I woke up early. Market failures. Okay, the second one is systemic policies, and the third one is policies which go into more proactive ones. Okay, Then I have a survey of all innovation policy instruments, one by one. And finally, a section on smart specialization alone, because it's currently the state of the art of innovation policies, with its advantages, but of course also a review of the criticisms which are there in the literature. Okay. Then on the evaluation, there is I start from the purpose of the evaluation. So why evaluate? The objects of evaluation, what to evaluate, the good practice in evaluation, so how to evaluate. Okay, and then I put the instruments, but not with the idea of making people be able to use this, but just understand what it is about. Okay, so ex-ante policy assessment through instruments such as input-output, cost-benefit analysis, territorial impact assessment and multi-criteria, and multi-equation models. Okay. Then the assessment of policy programs, so theory-based evaluation, and then the main qualitative techniques, and the ex-post policy impacts. Okay, so for instance, regressions, and of course counterfactual methods, which are currently the state of the art. And then I wanted to make people aware of the fact that it's not easy to assess policies. So I want there is this section on the difficulties, the conceptual empirical difficulties in measuring the impact of policies, also the modifiable area unit problem, the role of the timing and dynamics of policies in order to understand them. So why it's not the same to have, let's say, 50,000 jobs now or in 1 year, and why these effects may last or not. Okay. And then the consideration of the context, which is something in which I also published in the past. So why it's important to consider the context in the policy so that it is more effective. 3 minutes, fine. I'm almost there, because chapter 8, okay, wants to start from the idea that regional policy is something that is different depending on the place in which it is applied. Okay, of course you cannot have deterministic rules, but there are tendencies for different types of areas. Okay, so I start with the urban dimension of regional policy, because cities are in many cases the engine of growth, and so it's important to consider this. Okay, so urban policy may be instruments of regional policies, but you also need to coordinate urban and regional policies interventions. Okay, but then what can you do for regions without urban areas? Okay, so you may think about putting linkages or valorizing their own specificities. Then another type of regions which is usually studied is the one of peripheral regions, so which issues are associated with peripheralities. Then there are regions with mountains, which usually are peripheral, regions which are remote, sparsely populated, which are also usually peripheral, and rural areas again. Okay. Then regional policy for border regions and interregional cooperations, and regional policy for different levels of economic development. Okay, and finally, because when I got let's say the feedback from my colleagues, they told me, okay, yes, but you are always showing the pros and the cons of everything. You don't take a position. That's fine, but you should take a position. So I decided to keep the book neutral and to add a final concluding chapter, which is relatively short, in which I take a position, and which is the second part of the presentation, which is in the slides, but it's for another time. Okay, but I can forward it to you. Okay, so if I have a couple of minutes, just first. There is a lot of OECD in this book, of course, because there is a lot of research done here, which is very impactful. So I searched for the word. The word appears 76 times, which is quite a lot. Among the topics in which it is important, there is this objective definition, which I showed you before. Okay. But then I also wanted to mention the territorial grid, because I had some boxes in the book for people to use, and so I wanted to say, okay, you can use data from NUTS, from Eurostat, or from OECD. Okay, the old and new paradigm, which is from OECD in 2009. And then there was this publication done here a few years ago, or thinking real development policy making on how to use behavioral aspects in regional policy, and I think it reserved to have a section by itself. And then there is a reference to 2010 work in the description of roles of the agency, the governance, and also in the demand side innovation policy. But then there is spread everywhere, so there is a lot of things. Of course, there could be more, but okay, you need to synthesize. Okay, so very fast, 2 slides on the things on which I'm working on. So if there is anybody who wants to interact on current things, okay. The trade-offs of regional policy. Okay, here mostly refer to a special issue for coming regional studies, also with 2 contributions come from colleagues here. Okay. Then we have a project on administrative capacity with Laura Polverari, which you probably know. She's a political scientist. Okay, I'm an economist, and so we work together on this, and we're trying to get indicators of input and output measure at municipality level. So the project is started recently, so we don't have many results now yet, but we really want to see how these 2 relate or not. Okay. Then georeference data for policy assessment. So we had a project in which we put coordinates on a lot of things, okay, firms, policies, and so on and so forth. And now we are using to test a large number of research hypotheses. Then there is a new project on innovation ecosystem with Donato Iacobucci, whom you also may know is economist of innovation, mostly. In this first phase, we are looking for quantitative ways to identify ecosystems in space. Didn't find anything, let's say, that we like in the literature. If you have any suggestion, tell us, or otherwise we will design something. We have some ideas to design. Then the policy modeling at the sub-regional level, okay, because I told you that I like work on modeling. And so in this case, we are working with the Lombardy regional government because they want the territorial impacts of a resilience facility. Because Lombardy, you may know, is 10,000 inhabitants, so it's as large as Belgium. So they are, I mean, now they are aware that there are polarities inside the region, and so they want to have instruments to model these polarities. Okay, and finally, we are starting a project on trade linkages and cohesion policy, so to understand whether cohesion policy speaks from one place to the other with trade linkages, and so if trade linkages are a channel for policy impacts. Okay, so I stop here. I thank you everybody for the attention. This is the book. I brought a couple of copies. I don't have hundreds of copies, but I brought a couple of copies if you want to keep it here. And what interests more is my email contact. So if you want to get in contact with me at any stage later on, it's quite easy because names are named, and that's it. Okay. So we can stop the presentation.
Perfect. Thanks, Ugo. I think there was a lot in this, a lot of food for thought. So we have a couple of minutes left for discussion, questions, exchange. Anyone who wants to go first? Otherwise, I kick it off as always. Andy?
Thank you. That was really good. It was a great overview of the theory and practice of regional policy. I should introduce myself. I'm Andrew Patterson. I'm a senior counsellor here in the OECD Centre for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities. I did a lot of work in the UK before I came to the OECD on regional policy. And what I thought was really interesting about your presentation is that you articulated, I think, a very clear definition of place-based policy, which is one that I think was absent in the literature, and one that we could make a lot of here, I think. One of the things you didn't talk so much about, which is quite common in the literature, is displacement, and about the kind of risks of regional policy simply acting as zero-sum displacement across the country or a country. And I wondered what your view is on that, and certainly those risks and how to manage them, and whether or not there's any evidence you've come across or you present in your book around those kinds of effects.
I mean, no, that's a very important point. I try to make people aware of these things in several parts. So there is a lot about trade-offs in the book. The idea that you get something and you renounce something else. There is also the idea of displacement, for instance, for public investments to private ones, which is also something very important, because otherwise people think, okay, we invest and that's everything, and then it works. So yeah, I think it's very important. I didn't put any, let's say, evidence on that in the book. I made some reference to publications, okay, but as I told you, the book is purely normative. So I didn't add really anything, just some examples here and there. But I mean, the point that there are trade-offs is probably the leitmotif of the whole book. So the fact that when you do something, you need to be aware and be careful that you may get unintended effect somewhere else.
Rüdiger?
As you probably know, we are currently basically finishing a publication on place-based policies, and we're struggling a bit with how to best define it. And given that you have been visibly spending a lot of time thinking about, I mean, regional development policies, and also the link and the differences between place-based policies and regional development policies, maybe you could give us your view on, you know, what would be a good definition of place-based policies, and how would it be different from your definition from regional development policies?
Okay, yeah, okay. Yeah, my book is not on place-based policies, is on regional policy overall, which may not be place-based at all. I tend to, let's say, when I go with place-based, I tend to be, let's say, in line with the definition that was once given by Philip McCann about place-based policies as those which are implemented taking into account the place specificities with the involvement of local agents in a multi-level governance. So that's let's say basically what my own take of place-based policies. Then of course you can have a lot of policies which are not place-based. I think that in some cases we are probably implementing place-based also in cases in which we may need a bit more of a top-down because the issue of administrative capacity, okay, but that comes from my own personal understanding and research, okay, the book was more neutral about that, but there are cases in which you ask local administrations to implement very complex schemes, they don't have the capacity, and then the results are underwhelming, and perhaps in those cases, I mean, you should stay place-based because you need to consider the specificities and the need of the people, okay? But probably a bit less place-based in terms of implementation. Okay, so there may be for some very difficult cases, some cases in which probably the standard place-based doesn't work. I mean, it's like smart specialization, okay? So we know that some places did very good smart specialization strategies, and usually are also places which are very good at innovation, and then you look at the smart specialization strategies of some lagging regions, and they are either very conservative, so they just report the sectors of specialization, or they are high-flying and they report things that they will never achieve. Okay, so I mean, it's important to consider this. Okay, but yeah, that's my view. My very peels my view on that.
We take it online and then go back to the room. We take two questions, Betty Ann and Alex.
Thank you for the presentation. I may have missed this, but I was wondering, regional policy by itself is interesting, but it sits on top of, or it tries to kind of corral urban policies and rural policies, and the regions also will differ, so depending on the space. So I was wondering in the book how it picks up this idea that regional policy has to kind of in some ways link to urban policies, which may be more I mean, national leaning and then rural policies, which is a mix of national and local. So that sentiment makes it more difficult for regional policy to work on its own.
Alex?
Thank you very much. I am Alex Rus. I'm also an economist at CFE. I have a question. You answered a little bit in your previous answer, but you talk a lot about place-based policies and how you should do it and what are the trade-offs involved. But what I would like to also know is, when doesn't it work to some extent? So you talked a little bit about this administrative capacity of the different places where you want to implement the policy. Are there other cases where you think you shouldn't necessarily go place-based, apart from some obvious cases? So what are the actual limits to place-based that we should keep in mind?
Okay, as a first question first, as I told, I didn't address urban policies in the book, which is already 400 pages like this, and the publisher wanted to be even shorter, but then it wasn't possible. But the relationship, I mean, between urban and rural policies, I try to, let's say, account these in chapter 8 about regional policy in different contexts, because of course urban policies have their own specific instruments. So imagine like revitalization of the private neighborhoods and things like that, but they also have impacts which may spill out of the city to the region. And in many cases, the region also impacts what happens in the city. So we cannot really separate the two things. And I definitely agree with you on that. What is very different is, say, the instruments which are applied, because some instruments are specific of one and some are specific of the other, because cities are smaller for certain types of instruments of regional policy. For instance, okay, you don't run, let's say, a smart specialization strategy for a city or just some neighborhoods. But it's very important to be aware of the concurrent effects of these two policies, and also for rural policies. Okay, so of course this is not a book of rural policies, but there is a section in which I try to show which aspects of rurality can be exploited for the development of regions. On the second question, let's say I'd like to put an example. Okay, I was in a project by the German Ministry of Finance, okay, which we are probably going to publish a report recently, okay, in which we are looking, okay, they were very open. They asked, let's say, contributions on how things work in terms of cohesion policy in order to gather ideas on the next programming period. Then they will take their own position, but it's not something they ask us as, let's say, external experts, okay? And I did a very simple exercise like this. I tried to classify regions in terms of need for regional policy, okay? And then in parallel with this, I tried to measure the presence of the most common conditioning factors identified in the literature, those which make regional policy more effective. Okay, and so it ends up that regions less in need are also those more endowed in human capital, which is a well-known conditioning factor, in administrative capacity, in infrastructure, in innovative capabilities, and so on and so forth. Okay, so definitely, if you let's say give those regions more in need the same policy, they say, pills that you give to the others, it's difficult, okay, because they probably lack some basic things first, okay. And so I'm also in favor of, let's say, probably put in parallel. Okay, so if you have advanced regions having all of the assets, they may have their own place-based. Okay, but in less advanced regions, maybe you need place-based. But in parallel, you may need some intervention building the basic requirements for development, and these interventions probably will need additional resources and also additional help in terms of implementation. Okay, that's my opinion. Okay, which goes beyond the book.
We take a last round of questions from the room. Do anyone else? And Courtney.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is really super interesting for us. And next year, we will organize a ministerial meeting with all ministers in charge of regional policy in the OECD. The focus the title is actually strengthening regional policy for resilient places. So really super interesting your presentation. I would like to follow up on Rudiger's question on the definition, because we are really finalizing this report, struggling a little bit on place-based policies for the future. We have introduced in our definition a rather strong focus on the proactive dimensions, so not just the reactive dimension. So the focus is not only on lagging places or distressed places, but also places at risk of being distressed in the future. This is also following a seminar that we have with Jens Sudecum last year. So I just wanted to ask you, what do you think of this proactive dimension in our approach?
Yeah, I can contribute to what Dorothy said also on this definition, because it is the topic at the moment. I wonder as well, with the difference between regional policy and place-based policy, is whether place-based policy to an extent really focuses on lagging regions and really revitalizing growth in places that are left behind in the definitions and the literature. And I wonder the extent to which you agree with that. And it sort of always perhaps involves some sort of outside support or top-down support, which is what you mentioned in the McCann definition as a definition of place-based policies specifically, which maybe is different as well to place-based approaches, which is another perhaps sort of thing where you, but that's kind of another term in the literature that you come across. I wanted to then touch on also in your definition and your example comparing regional policy to medicine. I mean, it kind of comes with the perspective that regional policy is always about fixing a patient, or there's always a problem that you're trying to fix. But I guess regional policy can also be proactively opening up to the future. So there's not always a problem or a patient to fix in regional policy. So I wondered if you agree with that definition of maybe place-based policies is always a patient to fix. So maybe the medicine is also a relevant example there. And maybe just to flag as well that last year, and some colleagues online, also there was a recommendation on regional development policy that was developed at the OECD. It was probably done after the main drafting of your book, but it could also be have some linkages, and I think it aligns very closely with some of the messages that you have as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I think okay. Yeah, they came out after the book was first delivered, because it took 6 months to produce for the publisher. But yeah, okay. So how is it? Okay, I start from the last from the last point. Okay, the proactive, which is also related to yeah, I'm very yeah, this parallel between medicine and it stops there, because I mean regional policy can also be proactive in getting the opportunities. Okay, I put a section on which says that one of the objectives is trying to let's say exploit opportunities when they are present. And in this sense, yes, it is not. I mean, modern medicine is also preventive. Because when they tell us to do sports, don't do it. But it's also proactive in this sense. Then on place-based, I mean, I don't have a new definition for place-based. Okay, I elaborated one for regional policy. Okay, which in my opinion includes place-based regional policies. Okay, because in my opinion, place-based regional policies are those policies applied locally with the involvement of local communities in order to get their desires, but not just their desires, but also their help in the design and implementation of the policies, so that it gets to this idea of ownership, okay, which is a keyword which is very important, which you probably are using in your report, the idea of so that local people, local communities need to own the policy if the policy has to be effective. So is place-based policies just for lucky regions? In my opinion, no, because place-based is exactly more about this involvement of local people on one hand, and on the other hand is about personalizing policies on these specific situations of places. Okay. So something which is now quite established, but on which I worked quite a lot in the past years along with other colleagues. We did a lot of papers, not all of me. I mean, I did some papers also on this. It is showing that, for instance, regional policy is more or less effective depending on the conditions. Okay, where this paper 5 years ago, for instance, in which we looked at which type of policy intervention were more or less effective depending on which type of territorial capital was present in the region. Okay, that's another basic of place-based policy, in my opinion. So to look at what is there, what assets you can exploit, what let's say things you need to fix, what balance you can achieve. Okay, because also the theory of territorial capital is one in which says that the various territorial capital assets need to be balanced. So you cannot have a very good infrastructure if you don't have. I mean, you can have very good infrastructure, but it's not worth anything if you don't have the other development assets. Okay, that's the idea. Okay, so for me, place-based is looking at what is there in the place and involving local communities. So these are the two main aspects for me. So I mean, in my opinion, place-based is for every region, okay, but may not be enough for the very lucky ones. There may be some supplement, okay, some vitamins, some additional things.
Thank you, Udo. With that, I think we owe him a big hand while he can't. Okay. Ugo is going to be here for the afternoon and has a couple of meetings lined up. If you have an urgent need to continue the conversation, drop me a line and I'll try to squeeze you in as well. Otherwise, thanks again for coming, and thank you everyone for your patience at the beginning, and I hope you enjoyed this.